In 2006, Charlie Roberts walked into a small Amish school in rural Pennsylvania. Then he did something unspeakable and unexplainable. He trained his gun on the young girls. As they cried out for mercy, he brutally shot them one by one. In one horrifying moment, 5 precious young girls were murdered, and another 5 were savagely wounded. The Amish are a community of Christians who don't go to war. They live simple lives, and they're known for taking care of each other. What did they do to deserve an attack on their girls like that? What could possibly go so wrong in a man's heart that he would deliberately harm children? And how could anyone ever forgive the Roberts family after what Charlie did? Today on Masterstroke, we'll explore the enormous struggle to forgive, and we'll also learn of people who remarkably released their burden of bitterness. In western France is the city of Nantes. With a population of nearly 1 million people, this city is famous, not just for its river and proximity to the Bay of Biscay, but also for its art, history, and religion. The Nantes Museum of Fine Arts was created over 200 years ago. It now comprises over 10,000 works. The paintings range from the 13th right through to the 21st centuries. They feature works by Monet, Kandinsky, Picasso, and Rubens. Within all the beauty of this spectacular museum, it was this bizarre painting that captured my attention. Here we have a pretty sick-looking old man who's sitting on a throne. It looks like a court scene. This painting is titled Pope Formosus and Pope Stephen VI in 897. What I didn't realise at the time is the heartbreaking bitterness that permeates through this painting. The artist is Jean-Paul Laurens. This French academic, painter and sculptor of the 1800s had a fascination with religious history. And this passion is reflected in many of his paintings. The reason this man here looks so sick is because he's dead. He'd been dead for 7 months. In fact, his body was mummified. We can see him dressed like royalty. His corpse is propped up. His eye sockets stare into blankness, and his jaw is hanging down. The name of the dead man is Pope Formosus. Now, Formosus in Latin means good looking, but as you can see, he's not looking too good now. His accuser is over here with a pointed finger. Then there's another man standing in a dock. The reigning Pope, Pope Stephen, well, he's sitting down here witnessing the event. So what is this strange event in history? This painting depicts the Cadaver Synod, otherwise known as the Synod of the Corpse. The location was the mother of all churches, the St. John of Lateran in Rome. The date was 897 AD. Pope Stephen hated one of his predecessors, Pope Formosus, with a passion. So what did he do? He exhumed his body, sat him on this throne, and put him on a mock trial. The charges against Formosus included perjury and taking over the papacy illegally. Here we can see the inquisitor accusing him of the charges, while this man standing in the dock, he had to give answers on behalf of the dead pope. Imagine that. The Oxford Dictionary of Popes claims that the reigning pope had a near hysterical hatred of Formosus. History tells us that during this mock trial, Pope Stephen screamed out accusations. He hurled insults while he mocked the dead Pope. His bitterness was so intense, some thought he was a madman. Well, guess what? At the end of this trial, the dead Pope Formosus was found guilty. Hardly a surprise. His punishment was to be wiped from the history of the popes. Additionally, they chopped off his 3 blessing fingers and his body was flung into the River Tiber. Can you imagine hating someone so much you'd do that to them, even after they're dead? Incidentally, hatred never pays. The body of Formosus washed up on the riverbank. Then rumours started to spread that the body performed miracles. Pope Stephen was then taken captive for his deeds and he was later strangled. Over time, Pope Formosus returned to favour. You can still see his name in the Vatican. He's on the honour list of all popes. Pope Stephen's grudge destroyed him. All it did was enhance the reputation of his arch rival. That's the destructive power of holding on to hatred. Even if we have a good reason to be angry, hatred can only ever hurt us. When Nelson Mandela was released in 1990, after 27 years in prison, he said this: "As I walked out the door towards the gate that would lead to my freedom, I knew if I didn't leave my bitterness and hatred behind, I'd still be in prison." Are you still in prison? Or have you chosen to forgive those who have hurt you to your core? Recent research indicates the amazing impact that forgiveness has on our health and well-being. When we choose to forgive those who have hurt us, our quality of life soars. Our sleep improves. Our resilience is strengthened. Our relationships and marriage is enhanced. We experience less stress, fewer health problems, even less cancer. We just feel good. But for most of us, forgiveness doesn't come easily, particularly when you've been badly hurt. The Scots Church in Melbourne is one of the grandest churches in Australia. It's filled with history. It's surrounded by spectacular stained glass windows which depict stories from the Bible. One set of windows that I noticed in particular was created by the master Bavarian craftsman F.X. Zettler. These windows portray a story told by Jesus which directly addresses the meaning and importance of forgiveness. You see, it was a tradition of the rabbis that no one should have to forgive more than 3 times. Well, that makes sense, doesn't it? If we give a person a second chance when they've committed a serious wrong against us, we're considered on the generous side of fair. If we give someone a 3rd chance, we're very generous, maybe even naive. So when Peter said to Jesus, "How many times do I have to forgive someone? How about 7 times?" Well, he was expecting major affirmation. He must have been waiting for Jesus to say, "Finally, one of you guys have got it. Well done, Peter. You've got such a loving heart." Instead, Jesus hit him with an answer that must have absolutely rocked him to his foundations. "Peter, you shouldn't only forgive someone 7 times, but 70 times 7. In other words, stop counting because I don't count, I just forgive." Jesus then told the story shown on these windows. Jesus said there was a king who audited the books of his servants. During the audit, he found one of them owed 10,000 talents. Now, just to give you an idea of how much that means in today's money, 10,000 talents is about $14 billion. In ancient times, the king has the right to enslave the debtor and all his family. But the king in this story doesn't do it. He doesn't even institute a payment plan. Instead, he forgives the entire debt and sets the man free. Now, on this window, we see the king sitting on his throne. But the debtor in question is not the bearded man at the front, the man handing over his money. It's the man in blue at the back. To me, he looks nervous. As he covers his small money bag, he knows full well he doesn't have the means to pay his debt. Maybe he's thinking, what will happen to me? The king in the story represents God, and the servant, he's us. Just like the servant, we can never repay our debt to God. And just like the king, God doesn't expect us to. Rather, he sets us free. That's forgiveness. But I wonder if there's a limit to God's forgiveness. In the Sistine Chapel, Michelangelo painted this bizarre scene where two people have their backs towards each other. Who are they? Well, you can see their names here: Hezekiah, Manasseh, and Amon. They were three successive kings of Judah. Hezekiah, well, he's above the painting. Manasseh is on the right, while his wife Meshulameth, she's holding onto their son Amon. Michelangelo painted Manasseh on his own. He's slumped forward and he's sitting in the shadows. He's in a meditative pose and he looks to be full of remorse. So why did Michelangelo paint this man in this position? The answer is simple. God said Manasseh was the most wicked man that had ever lived. He began his life with everything going for him. His father was Hezekiah, a good and godly king. He had the prophets Isaiah and Micah as his mentors, two of the most powerful prophets in the Old Testament. He then became king at age 12. He had it all. So what happened to him? Manasseh decided to turn his back on God and to worship pagan idols. He killed the prophet Isaiah by putting him in a hollow log and sawing him in half. That was just the beginning of his debauchery. Now see this baby down here. Manasseh took his own tender little baby and burned him alive as a sacrifice to the pagan god Moloch. But then things began going very badly for Manasseh. He was taken captive by the Assyrians and spent 12 long years in jail. During this time, Manasseh, he came to his senses. I think the second best text in the Bible is this one. In his distress, Manasseh sought the favor of the Lord his God and humbled himself greatly before the God of his ancestors. Now comes the best text. And when he prayed, the Lord listened to him and was moved by his request. So the Lord brought Manasseh back to Jerusalem and to his kingdom. Then Manasseh finally realized that the Lord alone is God. God, it turns out, was a far greater savior than Manasseh was a sinner. Even though Manasseh murdered one of the greatest prophets of history, even though Manasseh was a child killer, even though Manasseh acted in complete rebellion to God, when Manasseh repented of his evil, God forgave even Manasseh. Now, maybe we haven't done anything in Manasseh's league, but all of us have hurt someone. I dare to say all of us have been cruel at times. We've been selfish, unkind, sometimes in very harmful ways. But here's the point. If God can forgive a wretch like Manasseh, he'll certainly forgive us. Interestingly, the name Manasseh has a very important meaning. It means forgotten. God forgave Manasseh and forgot his sins. It was like he never sinned at all. We live in an age where we judge happiness by how much we have. But for me, my greatest possession, it's not my house, It's not my car. It's not money in the bank. It's the ability to put my head on my pillow at night and know the mercy of God. So let's think about the second stained glass window. Here we see the same servant who was forgiven by the king. But now he's standing over a fellow servant like a gangland bully. He has one hand on his shoulder, the other on his head. He's possibly saying, "Pay up now." The debtor is on his knees, his hands tied behind his back, humble, begging for mercy. It's a very similar depiction to what we see here in this painting by Domenico Fetti. In this work, which is entitled The Unforgiving Servant, the actions of the man originally forgiven, they're even worse. He doesn't just have his hands on the man's shoulder or head. He's strangling him. In fact, the act of strangling is the very focus of the painting. But the vital information from the Scots church window is the response by the king. When the king sees what has happened, he stands to his feet and he points his finger as if to say, "Get that wretch out of here." Why? What happened? The Bible says that after the servant was forgiven by the king, he went out and saw another poor man who owed him just 100 denarii. How much is that? Well, 100 denarii is about 1/600,000th the amount the original servant owed his master. It's a pittance by comparison. Tragically, rather than forgiving the debt, the forgiven servant demanded full payment on the spot or else. Well, the debtor can't pay. So the servant condemns the debtor to prison. How ungrateful can you be? But the story isn't over, because the king hears what the servant has done and he's outraged. He calls the servant in and now he condemns him. The message? God will forgive us of anything, but we must forgive others. So here's the question. Is there even one person who we feel has wronged us that we have not forgiven? Sometimes it's not easy. A woman recently told me that when her daughter was a young child, their neighbour would walk past their gate, he'd wave and say hello. Well, the mother just thought he was a friendly old man. After 40 traumatic years, the daughter told her mother that the neighbour had repeatedly raped her. The mother then looked me in the eye and she said this, "Neale, how can I ever forgive that man?" Now, that's not a question we can give a glib answer to. A crime against a child is the most evil crime of all. Jesus himself said that if a man harms a child, God will administer justice against the man, and it would be better that he had a stone tied around his neck and was thrown into the water. But here's the point. As hard as it may be, we need to trust God with justice and trust him to give us forgiveness. Now, that doesn't mean criminals shouldn't be prosecuted and that we shouldn't testify against them. We should. But we should do so without being motivated by hatred. When we harbour hatred, even against someone who deserves to be hated, it destroys us. We punish ourselves twice over. Resentment is an emotional cancer. As Anne Lamott put it, holding on to resentment is like eating rat poison and waiting for the rat to die. God offers us the gift of forgiveness, and it's only through his immense power that in such distressing circumstances we can forgive. When Jesus was on the cross, he prayed, "Father, forgive them because they don't know what they're doing." Last year, I spent 3 months studying intently that one phrase of Jesus. To forgive someone who is crucifying you, well, that's beyond my comprehension. You see, Jesus was abused physically, tortured, and then crucified. He was abused verbally. He was bullied and people spat in his face. And if Jesus was stripped naked and hoisted into the air, it could be argued that Jesus was once again horrendously abused. But he didn't become bitter. He didn't even wait until they asked for forgiveness. He just gave it. That is love, and that is forgiveness. Gary Ridgway killed 49 people. He's known as the Green River Killer, and this man was caught and tried for his crimes. One by one, the parents of his victims would stand to their feet as they told him what an evil man he was, how glad they were he would suffer and go to hell. Ridgway sat there stony-faced as he listened to their statements. But then Robert Rule, whose daughter Linda Rule, who was just 16 years old when Ridgway strangled her, he stood to his feet. In a beautiful, clear voice, he made the most remarkable statement. Mr. Ridgway, there are people here who hate you. I'm not one of them. I forgive you for what you have done. You've made it difficult to live up to what I believe and what God says to do. And that is forgive. And he doesn't say to forgive certain people. He says to forgive all. So you are forgiven, sir. Ridgway, who was sitting stony-faced as each victim's family expressed their hatred and disdain for him, all of a sudden broke down crying. Something about forgiveness had reached his heart, where hatred could not. I cannot get Robert Rule's speech out of my mind. That is forgiveness. Think about the person who you feel has wronged you. Have you forgiven that person just like Robert Rule forgave the killer of his daughter? Could you do it? I couldn't. Well, not alone. It just isn't in me. But with God's help, with His help, yes, all things are possible, even forgiving the most evil of people. The Bible puts it this way: do not be overcome with evil, but overcome evil with good. Dirk Willems' story is told in the book Martyr's Mirror. In 1569, Willems escaped a Dutch prison. He made a rope from strips of cloth and he then slid down the prison wall. You see, he'd been arrested for believing in adult baptism and he was destined for death by fire. As Willems ran across a body of water, which was coated by a thin layer of ice, he knew he needed to be careful. One slip, in he could go. His captors chased him and they were hot on his tail. Then the most amazing thing happened. Willems made it to safety, but the prison guard, he fell in. "Help, help," he cried out. Willems had a fatal choice to make. Keep running and let the ice mete out justice on his captor, or risk everything to save his arch enemy. Dirk Willems knew that Jesus said to love your enemies. And we can see in this painting behind me what he did next. Willems turned around, he went back to his captor and he pulled him to safety. The boss, or this thief captor, he was standing on the shore. He told the now saved man to arrest Willems at once and bring him back for justice. Despite being saved from certain death, the man who fell into the icy waters, he arrested Dirk Willems. Willems was tried for his crimes, and on May 16, 1569, he was executed by fire. The wind of the day blew the flames away. It resulted in a long, painful death. Over 70 times, Willems was heard crying out, "Oh, my Lord, my God." Then finally, this hero of faith and forgiveness, he was dead. Why did Dirk Willems save his jailer? It was because his love for Jesus meant more to him than his love for his own life. On Judgment Day, Willems and his captor will meet again. They'll stand at the feet of their king. At that moment, will Willems regret forgiving his enemy just as Jesus forgave those who killed him? I don't think so. In fact, Willems and Jesus will share a certain bond. Very few of us can understand it, because both of them, under the most extreme circumstances, they overcame hate with love. When we consider their stories, we can't help but be inspired. If they did this under such extreme circumstances, surely we can forgive those who've hurt us. We began with the story of the dreadful shooting of Amish girls by Charlie Roberts. At the end of his spree, Charlie turned the gun on himself. Now, when his parents got the news of the murders, you can imagine they were shattered. Their precious son was dead. But worse, he'd done something so despicable, it's impossible to comprehend. They found themselves in the darkest place a mother and father could possibly be. In their immense grief, they made plans to leave the community in shame as soon as they'd finished burying their son. But then something strange happened. In fact, they were shocked. At their son's funeral service, Amish families showed up to grieve with them. Charlie's mother expressed her surprise this way. For the Amish mother and father, who had just lost not one, but 2 daughters at the hand of our son, to come up and be the first ones to greet us at Charlie's funeral, wow, is there anything in this life that we shouldn't forgive? Now, when they told their Amish neighbours they were planning to leave, the neighbours convinced them to stay. Today, Charlie's mum volunteers her time caring for one of the girls handicapped by a bullet Charlie shot. To others who have suffered enormous loss, she advises, ask God to provide new things in your lives, new things to focus on. That doesn't take away the place of what's lost, but it can give us a hope and a future. Forgiveness is maybe the hardest thing God asks us to do, but it's also the most beautiful. It's a gift that heals us, heals others, and it's a gift that brings us close to the heart of God.